Marilyn Monroe, the iconic blonde bombshell of old Hollywood, left behind a lasting legacy that transcends generations. Known for her beauty, talent, and tragic demise, she symbolizes glamour and vulnerability in equal measure. Monroe's impact on popular culture is undeniable. From her unforgettable performances in films like Some Like It Hot and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes to her timeless beauty and fashion sense. Her personal struggles with mental health and stardom have also added layers of complexity to her image, making her a relatable figure for many who struggle with similar issues today. Despite her untimely death at the age of 36, Marilyn Monroe continues to be a symbol of femininity, strength, and resilience for audiences around the world. Her influence on film, fashion, and pop culture remains as strong as ever, solidifying her status as an enduring icon. Not only does Marilyn Monroe remain a sex symbol, beauty icon, and one of the most famous stars of classical Hollywood cinema, she is remembered for her unstable childhood, troubled private life, her struggles for professional respect, as well as her death and the conspiracy theories that surround it. Welcome to another episode of Crimson Sin with Tamsin Lee. I am your host, Tamsin Lee. Show notes and sources can be found in the description. Today's case focuses on the life and death of Marilyn Monroe and the conspiracy theories that surround her death. But before we get into her untimely death, let's look at her life. Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1st, 1928, to Gladys Pearl Baker in Los Angeles, California. When she was just 15 years old, Gladys found herself married to John Newton Baker, a man who was 9 years older and abusive. After having 2 children together, Gladys successfully filed for divorce and was granted sole custody of Robert and Bernice in 1923. However, John kidnapped the children not long after and moved them to Kentucky. After the divorce, Gladys worked at Consolidated Film Industries as a film negative cutter. In 1924, she married Martin Edward Mortensen. However, the couple would separate a few months later and divorce in 1928. It would later be discovered in 2022 through DNA testing that Monroe's father was Charles Stanley Gifford, a co-worker of Gladys whom she had an affair with in 1925. As Gladys was mentally and financially unprepared for a child, she placed her daughter with evangelical Christian foster parents, Albert and Ida Bolender. Gladys would live with the couple and her daughter for 6 months before having to move back to the city for work. But she would visit her daughter on the weekends until Gladys was able to purchase a small house in Hollywood in 1933. The mother and daughter shared their home with lodgers, actors George and Maud Atkinson, and their daughter Nellie. But even though things were looking up for the small family, things soon took a turn for the worst. In January 1934, Gladys had a mental breakdown and was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. After spending several months in a rest home, she was committed to the Metropolitan State Hospital and would spend the rest of her life in and out of hospitals, leaving Monroe a ward of the state. Luckily, her mother's friend, Grace Goddard, took responsibility over her and her mother's affairs. Monroe continued living with the Atkinsons for the next 16 months. It is believed that Monroe may have been sexually abused during this time. At the same time, the shy young girl developed a stutter and became withdrawn. During the summer of 1935, Monroe briefly stayed with Grace and her husband, as well as 2 other families before being placed in the Los Angeles Orphans' Home in September of the same year. While the orphanage was described as a model institution and seen in a positive light, Monroe understandably felt abandoned. However, the orphanage staff convinced Grace to become Monroe's legal guardian in 1936. Her second stay with the Goddards lasted only a few months because Grace's husband, Doc, molested her. Monroe would then live with her relatives and Grace's friends and relatives in Los Angeles and Compton. In September 1938, Monroe began living with Grace's aunt, Anna Lower. During that very year, she would also learn that she had an older half-sister, Bernice, from her mother's first marriage. However, in 1941, the elderly Lower started developing health issues and Monroe was sent back to live with the Goddards. While living with the Goddards for the third time, she met a factory worker named James Doherty, who was 5 years older than her, and at 15 years old, she began dating him. The following year, Doc Goddard's employers relocated the family to West Virginia. However, this proved to be a problem as the California child protection laws prevented the Goddards from taking Monroe out of the state. Monroe was faced with the prospect of being placed back into the orphanage. But Grace Goddard had an idea. She approached James Doherty's mother with the proposition of her son marrying Monroe. The mother agreed. However, James and Monroe were skeptical of the idea as Monroe was still young. On June 19, 1942, Monroe married Doherty and dropped out of high school to become a housewife. Her husband enlisted in the Merchant Marine in 1943 and was shipped out to the Pacific in April 1944. After her husband left, Monroe moved in with his parents and started a job at the Radioplane Company to help with the war effort. The same year, she met photographer David Conover, who was sent to the factory to capture morale-boosting pictures of female workers. Monroe then quit her job at the factory in January 1945 to begin modeling for Conover and his friends. She moved on her own and signed a contract with the Blue Book Model Agency in August 1945, defying the wishes of her husband and mother-in-law. From there, she started straightening her hair and dyeing it platinum blonde. Before long, she would sign a 6-month contract with 20th Century Fox. Her contract began in August 1946, and her stage name, Marilyn Monroe, was coined. However, the studio was reluctant to hire her because she was a married woman, fearing she would become pregnant. So in September 1946, she divorced her husband, leaving him heartbroken. For the first 6 months of her contract at Fox, Monroe spent her time learning acting, singing, dancing, and observing the filmmaking process. It wasn't until her contract was renewed in February 1947 that she started her first film roles. However, teachers at the Actors Laboratory Theater thought her too shy and insecure to have a future in acting. As a result, Fox did not renew her contract in August 1947. While she went back to modeling, Monroe was determined to make it as an actress and continued studying at the Actors Lab. Even with bit parts in movies and television, her popularity with audiences grew. In early 1952, Monroe began a highly publicized romance with one of the most famous sports personalities of the era, retired New York Yankees baseball star Joe DiMaggio. Only 2 months later, she found herself at the center of a scandal when she publicly revealed she had posed for a nude calendar in 1949. The studio she worked for learned of the photos and worked with Monroe to prevent this from damaging her career by stating she was broke at the time. The strategy gained her sympathy as well as increased interest in her films. 3 of Monroe's films were released soon after the scandal to capitalize on the public interest. As she was enjoying her popularity as a sex symbol, Monroe wished to showcase more of her acting range and continued taking acting classes. However, 3 other films released in 1952 continued with her typecasting in comedic roles that highlighted her sex appeal. While she wanted to showcase herself more as an actress, She still continued adding on to her reputation as a new sex symbol with publicity stunts as she wore a revealing dress when acting as Grand Marshal at the Miss America pageant parade and told a gossip columnist that she usually wore no underwear. She would also gain a reputation for being difficult to work with, which would only worsen as her career continued. Monroe was said to often be late, if she would even show up at all, did not remember her lines, and would demand several retakes before she was satisfied with her performance. Her problems on film sets were attributed to a combination of perfectionism, low self-esteem, and stage fright. To alleviate her anxiety and chronic insomnia, Monroe began taking barbiturates, amphetamines, and alcohol, which ultimately contributed to her problems. She would not be considered a severe addict until 1956. But after meeting Joe DiMaggio in 1952 while on a blind date, the two married on January 14, 1954. The newlyweds spent their honeymoon outside Idlewild, California. Monroe began filming the comedy The 7-Year Itch in September 1954 as a woman who becomes the object of her married neighbor's sexual fantasies. To generate advance publicity, the studio decided to film one of Monroe's most iconic scenes. Her standing on a subway grate with air blowing up the skirt of her white dress. Not only did this become one of Monroe's most famous scenes, it helped make The 7-Year Itch become one of the biggest commercial successes of the year. However, it also marked the end of her marriage to Joe DiMaggio, who was infuriated by the publicity stunt. Despite the ongoing divorce process, Monroe continued her relationship with DiMaggio. After founding her own production company with a photographer, Monroe moved to Manhattan, spending 1955 studying acting. She would attend workshops on method acting at the Actors Studio, run by Lee Strasberg. She would grow close to Lee and his wife Paula and received private lessons at their home because of her shyness. During this time, she began undergoing psychoanalysis because Strasberg believed that an actor must confront their emotional traumas to use them in their performances. It was during 1955 that Monroe began an affair with playwright Arthur Miller, even though he was married. When her divorce was finalized, Miller separated from his wife so he could be with Marilyn Monroe. This brought even more backlash towards the actress, as the studio urged her to end their relationship because Miller was under investigation by the FBI for allegations of communism, but she refused to end it. This led to the FBI opening a file on her as they suspected she was part of a communist group. However, there was no evidence uncovered to support these claims. On June 29, 1956, Monroe and Miller were married. The same problems, her dependence on drugs, and her tardy reputation persisted throughout the rest of the 1950s while filming several movies, with one director stating of her performance for Some Like It Hot, "Anyone can remember their lines, but it takes a real artist to come on the set and not know her lines, yet give the performance she did." After Some Like It Hot, she starred in the musical comedy Let's Make Love, but only accepted the part because she was behind on her contract with Fox. The film premiered in September 1960 and was unsuccessful during its release. That year, Monroe was committed to New York Hospital's Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic. Some reports claim she was admitted to the clinic for a suicide attempt, while others claim she was overcome with personal issues and committed for exhaustion. The actress believed she would receive a rest cure while at the hospital, but her experience was anything but, as it became traumatic. 4 days after being in the clinic, DiMaggio helped her get released. She stated of her time in the psychiatric clinic, "There was no empathy at Payne Whitney. It had a very bad effect. They asked me after putting me in a cell, cement blocks and all, for very disturbed, depressed patients. Except I felt I was in some kind of prison for a crime I hadn't committed. The inhumanity there I found archaic." The last film Monroe completed was John Huston's 1961 film, The Misfits. By the time the movie was completed, her marriage to Miller was over, due to the fact that her role in this particular movie was partly based on her life. She was also said to have struggled with her husband's habit of rewriting scenes the night before filming. However, her health was also failing from the pain she was experiencing from gallstones, and her drug addiction had become severe. Monroe spent the first 6 months of 1961 preoccupied with health issues, receiving surgeries and spending 4 weeks hospitalized for depression. She started a romance with Frank Sinatra and eventually moved back to California in 1961. During Monroe's final months, she lived in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. On the evening of August 4th, 1962, her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, was staying overnight. Murray woke up at 3 a.m. on August 5th to a feeling of uneasiness. The housekeeper saw light from under Monroe's bedroom door. However, she was unable to receive a response from her and found that the door was locked. Murray called Monroe's psychiatrist, Ralph Greenson, who came to the house and broke into the bedroom through a window. Greenson found a naked Monroe dead, covered by a sheet with her hand clamped around the telephone receiver. The physician of the late actress, Hyman Engelberg, arrived at the house at approximately 3:50 a.m., pronouncing her dead. The Los Angeles Police Department was then notified at 4:25 a.m. It was declared that the actress died on August 4th between 8:30 and 10:30 p.m. The toxicology report showed that the cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning, as she had 8 milligrams of chloral hydrate and 4.5 milligrams of pentobarbital in her blood, as well as 13 milligrams of pentobarbital in her liver. The possibility of an accidental overdose was ruled out because the dosages found in her body were several times the lethal limit. Monroe's doctor stated that the actress had a history of being prone to severe fears and frequent depressions, with abrupt and unpredictable mood changes, and claimed she had overdosed several times in the past, possibly intentionally. Due to this and the lack of indication of foul play, Monroe's death was classified as a probable suicide. However, Monroe's half-sister stated, "I don't think she committed suicide. It could have been an accident because I had just talked to her a short time before. She told me what she had planned to do. She had just bought a new house and she was working on the curtains of the windows. She had so many things to look forward to, and she was so happy." But that's the thing with celebrities. If time has shown us anything, it is that the very successful ones are the most depressed, even though they seem to have everything and appear put together. They are the saddest people on earth, with many celebrities coming to mind. The following decades saw several conspiracy theories arise, from everything including murder to accidental overdose. I hate using the word conspiracy when talking about conspiracy theories because it does discredit some of them that are actually probable. But these theories surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death are actually very interesting. Many of these involve U.S. President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert F. Kennedy, as well as Union leader Jimmy Hoffa and mob boss Sam Giancana. The speculation that she had been murdered first gained attention in 1973 with the publication of Norman Mailer's Marilyn, a Biography. The theory became widespread enough that the Los Angeles County District Attorney, John Van de Kamp, conducted a threshold investigation in 1982 to determine whether a criminal investigation should be opened. Despite these efforts, there was no evidence to support murder, and they agreed with the findings of the original investigation. However, the report conceded that factual discrepancies and unanswered questions remained in the case. According to a CIA document, a former coroner's aide claimed in 1982 that he was forced to sign Marilyn Monroe's death certificate. A file on the actress was altered and that her diary disappeared from a safe. Additionally, the reinvestigation into the actress's death revealed that all lab work, tissue samples, and test results from the autopsy had disappeared from the county coroner's office immediately after the official ruling had been made public. In early 1962, she began shooting a film, Something's Got to Give. But days before filming started, she caught cyanitis. While the studio was advised to postpone production, they continued filming in late April while Monroe was too ill to work. Despite confirmations by multiple doctors, Fox tried to pressure the actress by publicly alleging that she was faking her symptoms. On May 19th, Monroe took a break from filming and production to fly to New York and sing Happy Birthday on stage at U.S. President John F. Kennedy's birthday celebration at Madison Square Garden, 10 days before his actual birthday. This stint stirred up quite a bit of publicity for Monroe, but it also led to speculation about her having an extramarital affair with the president and growing concerns from government agents. When she returned, she continued filming Something's Gotta Give. However, she was again absent for several days, leading Fox to fire her on June 7th, while also suing her for breach of contract. Monroe was subsequently replaced by another actress. However, Dean Martin refused to make the film with anyone other than Monroe, leading Fox to sue him as well and shut down the production. She was eventually able to successfully renegotiate her contract with Fox and was scheduled to resume filming in Something's Gotta Give in September. So what exactly happened at Marilyn's home on August 4th, 1962? She met with photographer Lawrence Schiller in the morning to discuss the possibility of Playboy publishing nude photos of her on the set of Something's Gotta Give. Present at the house that morning were her housekeeper Eunice Murray and publicist Patricia Newcomb. At 4:30 p.m., Monroe's psychiatrist, Ralph Greenson, arrived at the house to conduct a therapy session and asked Newcomb to leave. Greenson left at approximately 7 p.m. and asked Murray to stay overnight to keep Monroe company. At around 7 to 7:15 p.m., Marilyn received a call from Joe DiMaggio Jr., with who she had stayed close to since her divorce with his father. He called to tell her that he had broken up with a girl she did not like. He stated that he did not find anything in their conversation to be alarming. Following that phone call from Junior, Marilyn called Greenson around 7:40 to 7:45 to tell him of Junior's breakup. Monroe then went to her bedroom at around 8 p.m. She then received a call from actor Peter Lawford, who was the brother-in-law of President Kennedy, who was hoping to persuade her to attend his party that night. Lawford stated that he became alarmed because Marilyn sounded like she was under the influence of drugs. He also stated that she told him to say goodbye to Pat, say goodbye to the president, and say goodbye to yourself because you're a nice guy, before drifting off. As he was unable to reach her again, he called his agent, Milton Evans, who unsuccessfully tried to reach Greenson and later called Monroe's lawyer. The lawyer, Milton A. Rudin, called the actress's house and was assured by Murray that she was fine. Around 3:30 a.m. on August 5th, Murray woke up with a feeling of dread, which only grew as she saw the light from under Monroe's bedroom door. As she knocked and called for Monroe, she was unable to receive a response and found that the door was locked. Murray then called Greenson, who advised the housekeeper to look through a window when she discovered Monroe lying face down on her bed, naked and covered by a sheet. Empty pill bottles were scattered around the room. Greenson arrived shortly after and entered the bedroom by breaking the window where he discovered Marilyn Monroe dead. Her physician was called and arrived at the house at 3:50 a.m., where he officially confirmed the death. Then the Los Angeles Police Department was notified at 4:25 a.m. The toxicology analysis concluded that the cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning. The police found empty bottles of these medicines next to her bed, and there were no signs of external wounds or bruises on the body. The first allegation that Monroe had been murdered originated in anti-communist activist Frank A. Capel's 1964 self-published pamphlet, The Strange Death of Marilyn Monroe, in which Capel claimed that her death was part of a communist conspiracy. Capel claimed that Monroe and U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy had an affair, and Maryland threatened to cause a scandal, which ultimately led to Monroe's death. Capel also accused Kennedy of being a communist sympathizer, as well as called many people close to Monroe communists. The author's credibility has been questioned because his source was columnist Walter Winchell, who received much of his information from Capel. So Capel was only citing his own words. LAPD Sergeant Jack Clemens, who is a friend of Capel's, helped the author in developing his pamphlet. Clemens was also the first police officer at the scene of Marilyn's death. He would make claims that he did not mention during the initial investigation. One such allegation was that when he arrived at Monroe's house, Murray was washing the actress's sheets in the laundry. However, Capel and Clemens' allegations were said to have been linked to their political goals. Capel dedicated his life to revealing an international communist conspiracy, while Clemens was a member of the Police and Fire Research Organization, who sought to expose subversive activities which threaten our American way of life. The duo's efforts, along with a third person, would lead them to legal troubles, as they found themselves indicted in 1965 by a California grand jury, ruining both of their credibility. Monroe's death was also discussed in Charles Hamlet's 1966 novel, Who Killed Marilyn Monroe, and in James A. Hudson's 1968 novel, The Mysterious Death of Marilyn Monroe. But neither of the works of Capel's, Hamlet's, and Hudson's were widely publicized. It would not be until Norman Mailer's 1973 work, Marilyn, a Biography, that allegations of murder became part of the mainstream discussion. In his book, Mailer claimed that Monroe and Robert F. Kennedy had an affair, and speculated that she was killed by either the FBI or CIA, who wished to use the murder as a point of pressure against the Kennedys. The book was heavily criticized upon its release. Mailer would also recant his allegations in an interview with 60 Minutes later that year, claiming that he made these accusations to ensure commercial success for his book. He further stated that he believed Monroe's death to be an accidental suicide. 2 years later, Robert F. Slatzer published The Life and Curious Death of Marilyn Monroe. Slatzer claimed Monroe was killed by Robert F. Kennedy, but also claimed that he himself was married to Monroe in Mexico for 3 days in October 1952 and remained close friends until her death. Music journalist Anthony Scaduto published an article in October 1975 about the death of Monroe and would expand on his account in the book Who Killed Marilyn Monroe, written under the pen name Tony Siaka. The author's only sources were Robert F. Slatzer and his private investigator, Milo Spiriglio. Echoing Slatzer's claims, Scaduto alleged that Monroe kept a red diary in which she had written confidential political information she had heard from the Kennedys, and that her house had been wiretapped by surveillance expert Bernard Spindell on the orders of Union leader Jimmy Hoffa, who was hoping to obtain incriminating information against the Kennedys. Milo Spiriglio then published Marilyn Monroe, Murder Cover-Up in 1982, in which she claimed Monroe had been murdered by Hoffa and mob boss Sam Giancana, basing his information off of Slatzer and Scaduto's books. Spiriglio added statements made by Lionel Grandison, who worked at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office at the time of Monroe's death. Grandison claimed that Monroe's body had been extensively bruised. However, this was removed from the autopsy report. Grandison also claimed to have seen Monroe's red diary, but it mysteriously disappeared. The continued accusations and demands made by Spiriglio and Slatzer led to Monroe's death being reopened by authorities. However, the new investigation did not find any evidence to support the murder claims. British journalist Anthony Summers was the most prominent conspiracy theorist in the 1980s and claimed that Monroe's death was an accidental overdose enabled and covered up by Robert F. Kennedy. Summers' investigation on Monroe began as an assignment for the British tabloid The Sunday Express to cover the 1982 review. His book, Goddess: The Secret Lives of Marilyn Monroe, became one of the most commercially successful Monroe biographies. Prior to writing on Monroe, he had written a book on a conspiracy theory of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. In the biography penned by Summers, he stated Monroe had severe substance abuse problems and was psychotic in the last months of her life. He alleged that Monroe had affairs with both John and Robert Kennedy, and that when Robert ended their affair, she threatened to reveal their association. To prevent her threats coming to fruition, Kennedy and Lawford allegedly enabled her addictions. According to Summers, Monroe became hysterical and accidentally overdosed, dying in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. The writer further claimed that Kennedy wanted to leave Los Angeles before Monroe's death became public to avoid being associated with it, and therefore her body was returned to her bedroom and the overdose staged as a suicide by Lawford, the Kennedys, and J. Edgar Hoover. Summers based this account on Marilyn Monroe's death on interviews he had conducted with 650 people connected to Monroe. However, Summers' research has been criticized by biographers Donald Spoto and Sarah Crunchwell. Spoto claimed that Summers contradicts himself, presents false information as fact, and misrepresents what some of Monroe's friends said about her. On the other hand, Churchwell stated that while Summers accumulated a large collection of anecdotal material, some of his allegations were speculation. She furthered that many of the people he interviewed could provide only second or third-hand accounts, and that these people relate what they believe, not what they know. Summers' allegations formed the basis for the 1985 BBC documentary Marilyn: Say Goodbye to the President, as well as a 26-minute segment for ABC's 2020. The 2020 segment was never aired, with ABC President Roone Ulrich stating that the claims made in the show needed more evidence to back them up. More books were published in the 1990s claiming that Monroe was murdered. Peter Brown and Pat Barham's 1992 book Marilyn: The Last Take and Donald H. Wolfe's 1998 The Last Days of Marilyn Monroe both relied extensively on Capel and Summers' works and did not provide any new evidence. Both works appeared to have been heavily criticized for their lack of sources and unfounded claims. Donald Spoto released a biography on Monroe in 1993 in which he disputed the previous conspiracy theories, but alleged that Monroe's death was an accidental overdose, staged as a suicide. According to the author's claims, Monroe's doctors, Greenson, and her personal physician, Engelberg, were trying to stop her abuse of Nembutal. The doctors decided that they would not prescribe anything without consulting each other first. The author claimed that Monroe was able to persuade Engelberg to break this promise. On the night of August 4th, she took several Nembutals, but did not tell this to Greenson, who prescribed her a chloral hydrate enema. The combination of these two drugs is what ultimately killed the sex icon. He furthered that, afraid of the consequences, the doctors and Murray staged the death as a suicide. Spoto continued that Monroe could not have been suicidal because not only did she reach a new agreement with Fox, she was also allegedly going to remarry DiMaggio. This theory was based on the alleged discrepancies in the police statements given by Monroe's housekeeper and doctors, as well as a claim made by Monroe's publicist, Arthur P. Jacobs' wife, that he had been alerted of the death already by 10:30 p.m. This theory was also based on prosecutor John Miner, who was involved in the official investigation, in which he alleged that Monroe's autopsy revealed signs more consistent with an enema than oral ingestion. Spoto's theory is the only one put forth that does not somehow relate to the Kennedys. The author stated that the Kennedys had almost nothing to do with her. Furthermore, he believed Monroe was killed by her psychiatrist, who had the housekeeper administer the lethal dosage of drugs via enema. The 2004 conspiracy put forth by Matthew Smith in his book Victim: The Secret Tapes of Marilyn Monroe once again implicates the CIA in Monroe's murder. He claimed that she was killed as revenge for the Kennedys' Bay of Pigs invasion. Smith argued that Monroe was a woman in full charge of her life, which directly opposes the narrative that she was depressed and suicidal leading up to her death. Members of the Chicago mob published Double Cross in 2010, taking responsibility for Monroe's death, claiming that it was payback to Robert Kennedy for his sustained attack on the mob. Their intended goal was to frame Robert Kennedy for Monroe's death, with evidence of Robert's presence there only hours old. However, FBI agents allegedly removed all traces of him quickly. While Monroe was dead, their desired outcome was foiled. In 2012, Monroe's niece, Mona Ray Miracle, denied the conspiracy theories, stating that Monroe had many appointments scheduled for August 5, 1962, including meetings with 20th Century Fox producers and a lawyer to change her will. She claimed Monroe planned on remarrying Joe DiMaggio, and her death was nothing more than an accident. Still, the theories surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death captivate the imaginations of millions around the world. So what did you think of today's case? Do you believe Marilyn Monroe was murdered, or that it was nothing more than an accident? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening and your support. Stay safe, and I will see you for the next episode. Bye.